What's up, HMG fam? It's your boy MSG back with a brand new series called Behind the Curtain, reading Vince Russo's Forgiven. That's right, we are going to read Vince Russo's Forgiven chapter by chapter. So if you like what you see here, drop a comment, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and it'll let me know that you enjoy this content, and I'll put out some more chapters for you. So sit back and enjoy Vince Russo's Forgiven.
So chapter 3, why is my mother biting her hand? I grew up on Long Island, New York, yada, 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 who cares? Man, I've read so many books where the author gets into such trite details in what appears to be, to me, no more than an effort to fill as many pages as humanly possible. I'm not going to torture you with that here. I'm thrilled that you bought this book, so I'm going to give you the most misery for your money. How come growing up we don't realize our families are dysfunctional? It's not latent till later in life when we watch Dr. Phil or Jerry Springer for that matter and say, hey, I know her. That's my mother. But before I can get to the fruitinator, that's my nickname for my mother, a fruitcake who's a Terminator, who wore Terminator-style glasses for a short period because she thought she was going blind. I have to talk about the guy who created the fruitinator, my grandfather, John Savarino. My grandfather, as Italian as you possibly can get, my grandfather had a huge influence on me growing up, but not in particularly a good way. You see, even though it was the norm at the time, Granddad was a male chauvinistic oink. He had to be. He was Sicilian. With the pencil-thin mustache straight out of every gangster movie you've ever seen, John Jay was no doubt a man's man. If you're an old-school Italian and you're reading this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The second my grandfather would walk in the door from work, he worked in the garment district of New York City, wearing his black fedora and carrying a worn New York Daily News under his arm. My grandmother, or Nana, would be there to wait on him hand and foot, arm and toe. You get the picture. If his black coffee wasn't on the table at the exact moment he took his hat off and coat off, there was going to be trouble. Man, this guy was my idol. After the black coffee came the wine, came the pasta, came the peaches with wine, and everybody was happy. The man was the boss, and his wife took care of him. The rules were simple for a granddad. It was unspoken Italian law. He was simply the king of his castle. This would have a huge influence on my adulthood. In many ways, I treated my wife Amy the same way. I was the boss. I took care of everything. As the great Ralph Crandon once said to his wife Alice, I am the captain of this ship, and you are nothing more than a lowly third-class seaman. Growing up, both Ralph Crandon and Archie Bunker were huge influences on me. The way they assumed the position of the head of the household was nothing short of inspirational. In my teens, I used to constantly tell my father, if you were more like Ralph or Archie, Mommy wouldn't treat you the way she does. The art of writing a television show could be found right in these two sitcoms. The Honeymooners and All in the Family were two of my early influences as far as comedy was concerned. Their dialogue, storylines, and character development were ingenious. And the acting wasn't too shabby either. Jackie Gleason's precision, timing, and Carol O'Connor's priceless facial expressions were near perfection. These two legends were clearly ahead of their time. Getting back to my granddad, though, he says, while he secured his spot at the head of the table, my father, Jim Russo, usually found his comfort zone somewhere underneath it. Oh, okay. Why? He says he may have been too scared to come out, afraid that Fruitinator was lurking somewhere in the surrounding area, clutching a list of things for him to do. It's just that simple. My mother dominated my father. I think the fact that my dad was 5'8" and weighed 140 pounds soaking wet might have had something to do with it. Jim, as I playfully but respectfully called him, was petrified of the Fruitinator. And what a nag, Mamma Mia. Jim do this, Jim do that. To this day, it's Jim do something, anything. But for remote controls, my mother wouldn't even get off the couch to change the channel. Jim had to do it. Man, this sad sack did everything. Wash the floors, do the dishes, all women's work. It drove me nuts. But the truth is, he just did it so he wouldn't have to hear her. No different than many husbands today. I mean, how many times do we do something just to get the wife off our back? But regardless of his lack of chauvinism, I still greatly treasured my dad. He was such a hard worker, setting the standard for me as I got older. He worked for a government contractor that made parts for military equipment. I think I remember him working overtime every night to provide for me. Fruity and my sister and I never heard him complain about it. He just did it. Unfortunately, his hard work never got him very far. It goes on to say, my dad was such a nice guy. People just took advantage of him. That's the nature of the beast. Vince McMahon always used to tell me, pal, it's the law of the jungle. Eat or be eaten. Well, on more occasions than one, my father was eaten alive. But he never cared. As long as he could play his softball on Sundays, softball was his drug. A very religious man, even though it wouldn't rub off on me. No matter how many times he would drag me to church, my father, a grown man, would literally go to church in his softball uniform before his game on Sundays. To this day, he doesn't miss a mass. But then again, is he really so religious, or is he just trying to get out of the house? He goes on to say, as much as I respected my father as a man, I swore to never grow up like him. Yes, I would adopt his work ethic, but no, I wasn't going to get walked on. He was just too good a man for that. A lot of my rebelliousness is a tribute to my father. I stood up for myself because on many occasions he had. But again, it all goes back to looking into the mirror. Today, at 73 years old, my father can proudly look into that glass and know that he didn't screw anybody. No backstabbing today. I can clearly understand his heart was as pure as they come. They just don't make him like him anymore. But my mother, her real name is Teresa, made up for my father's apathy. She wouldn't take anything from anybody. She was so much like her old man, John Jay. If you crossed her, you were done. My mother held grudges that still go on to this day, and now she's over 70 at the time. Now that's a real Italian. Screw me once, shame on you. Screw me twice, forget it. You'll never get the chance to screw me twice. I am so much like my mom in that respect. I just hate being dicked around. My philosophy has always been that nobody should take anything from anybody, not even the boss. And I live my life that way. I strongly felt that we were all in this together. No one person is better than the next. However, if there was never such a thing as boss, the Fruitinator was clearly one of them. If there was ever such a thing as boss, it was clearly the Fruitinator. While I was growing up, my mother didn't just wear the pants in the family. She wore the socks, the shoes, the guinea tee, the whole outfit. I never asked my father for anything. I always went to my mother. If I wanted money, permission, the car, she had sovereign authority. She was also the disciplinarian. She was the law of the house, and she laid it down with vigor. While I was under his roof, I don't remember my father ever laying a hand on me, except that one time. Okay, so once me and my friend Mikey got my father a bit English. You see, Jim didn't have much, but he had his lawn. My father cherished his lawn. If you saw Danny Aiello on 29th Jump Street, you know what I'm talking about. He'd cut it, rake it, trim it, thatch it, water it, watch it. It was his Garden of Eden. In other words, the lawn was off limits. Well, kids being kids, we insisted on playing on his field of dreams on those occasions when he left it unguarded. On this particular day, soccer was our game of choice, so there was me and Mike kicking the ball about on Jim's glorious carpet. Little did we know that Jim was crouched down and hiding on the other side of the backyard gate, just waiting to see if any trespassers would violate his oasis of green. Just as I yelled, he shoots, he scores, with a lion's roar, Jim leapt from his crouch and came out after us with a sterling silver grass clippers. Oh well. Basically, giant scissors is what he's saying. Mike and I, we were out of there, Roadrunner style. We never seen Jim like this. The small, gentle, quiet man transformed into Leatherface right before our very eyes. In our haste to get away, we left behind the poor, innocent, black and white checkered soccer ball. What a mistake. In a frenzy, Jim, unable to catch the younger, agile kids, got the soccer ball instead. In Jason Voorhees fashion, Jim firmly put the innocent ball between his legs and with the precision stabbed it repeatedly with the clippers, not believing what we were seeing. Mike and I carefully wandered back into the scene. Jim looked back and gave us a look that was half Nicholson in The Shining and half riffraff in Underdog. Now, in all his glory, I looked my father in the eye and said innocently, Dad, that's Mike's ball. All of a sudden, there was another transformation, this time from the out of control Incredible Hulk to the quiet, meek, and weak Bruce Banner. Not knowing what to do or say, the soccer ball lay dead in front of him. Jim slumped to his shoulders and did what he always did, apologized. He then went kindly back in the house, the grass clippers tucked gently between his legs. Apart from that incident, Gentle Jim was such a laid-back, kind guy. In many ways, he was a saint. To this day, he has one of the biggest hearts I've ever seen. Wait a minute. Let me go back up for a second. Okay, he had a huge heart when it came to kindness, but he was the cheapest human being you ever met. Let me put it this way. I remember him telling me that same story every Christmas from the time I was 5 until I was 25. When I was little and we had no money, the only thing I got for Christmas was a cowboy suit, and I was happy. I remember thinking year after year, what does that have to do with my drum set or my Nintendo or my stereo? That's a good point. But the truth is, my father really had no money to spend because my mother always took it from him. Jim would come home from work every Thursday and just hand his paycheck over to Terrible Terry, my mother's second pet name. She paid the bills, bought the groceries, and basically spent the rest of it. My father actually used to have to keep a miniature plastic piggy bank full of quarters in case of an emergency. And I'm not kidding, yes, Rin Tin Terry, yet another pet name, was the banker and the law. But if you're the law, you must meet some form of discipline. You must deal out some form of discipline. How Terry kept me in the line was unique. First, she would scream at the top of her lungs and then follow that up with idle threats and the famous, I feel my blood pressure going up. From there, my mother would do something that I must admit I never saw any of the other mothers do. She would place her hand, usually her right one, into her mouth and bite it as hard as she could. Wow, that is insane. She claimed it was an Italian thing, but I never saw anybody or anything ever act in that manner before or ever since. Not even in cartoons did I ever seen such a bizarre ritual. You'd think that Ren and Stimpy might have tried it once, but never. My mother would leave her own teeth marks on her own hand. Is that normal? I remember one time when me and my friend Richie Misbach got my mother so riled up that she went through screaming the blood pressure bit, the hand biting, and our sides were splitting with so much laughter. So at the time, she grabbed a belt and viciously whipped Richie and I after she had trapped us between my bed and the adjacent wall. We were laughing so hard we didn't even feel the pain, but that was just my mother, always a flair for the dramatic, forever with teeth marks in her hand. Now I fully understand that the family was dysfunctional. Back then, you just lived with it. There was no counselors to go to. And what proud Italian would go to a counselor anyway? No. It was much better to settle your differences by screaming from room to room and biting your own hands. Dr. Phil would have had a panic with this unruly crew. Its only saving grace was the backbone that held the family together with spit, glue, and farina pie. And that's my grandmother, Anna Savarino. Anna Savarino, how you doing? Man, I love Nana, an extremely religious woman. She even let Jehovah's Witnesses into the house. She was my everything. The kindest, sweetest, caring, gentlest woman. She cushioned the chaos of thunderous hailstorm. Just picture it. There was the fruitinator biting her hand in the kitchen. My grandfather demanding something in the dining room. My father hiding out, watching a game in the den. And my older sister probably somewhere on the phone talking to her 6'8" boyfriend, otherwise known as the Goon. That's a story for another time. But nothing fazed Nana. She would maintain control as the rigatoni boiled, the homemade sauce simmered. She was Edith Bunker, Andy Griffith's Aunt Bee, Mother Teresa, and your kindergarten teacher all rolled into one. She would affectionately call me her doll baby onion pie, which for some strange reason meant the world to me. She was the family rock, the most strong-willed female I'd ever known. Without warning, my grandmother passed away from a heart attack when I was 18 years old. She was only in her 60s. The world as I knew it was never the same. Talking about his grandmother passing away when he was 18. The family as I knew it would never also be the same. I was raised on the ritual of going to my grandparents every Sunday for some form of macaroni after Jim's Sunday morning doubleheader, of course. I'm guessing you're talking about alcohol. Though we yelled and screamed, and my mother did some occasional hand biting. She did a lot of this hand biting. He's really going on about it. That house on 21st Poplar Street in West Hampstead, New York, was filled with the warmest love I'd ever known. That's the way it is in an Italian family. The yelling never superseded the love. Never. But with the death of Nana came the death of a tradition. Day by day, week by week, month by month, the family grew further apart. The glue jar was empty. Society and our culture were pulling us apart, and there was no farina pie at the end of the day to bring us back together. Years later, John Jay would die alone in the nursing home. The stubborn, bullheaded Italian man never overcame the death of his wife, and at the end of the day, Archie couldn't survive without Edith. As my grandfather grew older and began to lose his senses, my mother kept telling me over and over again that I needed to go see him before he died. But I never could. This mountain of a man was my boyhood idol, and to see him weak and frail would have been too much even for me. When Granddad died, I didn't attend the funeral. I couldn't. I didn't want to remember him that way. In his last days, my grandfather came to Jesus, after staying as far away as he possibly could for his entire life. Now I understood that he did that for one reason only, to assure himself that he would one day see Anna again. Like as he was talking in the beginning of the book, there's like Vince 90s, Vince 2000s, and Vince Forgiven. And I think what we were reading right there was a lot of Vince 2000s. Because then I think this next expert right here is Vince Forgiven, where he says, I'm going to point out certain instances in my life where now that I've been saved by Jesus Christ, I can clearly see that God was present. Unfortunately, having been blind to his light at the time, I just couldn't see the grace he was desperately trying to extend. The first instance took place at the time of the unexpected death of my grandmother. As I said here, for as long as I could remember, it was a ritual that every Sunday we spent visiting with my grandparents. This ratio of them coming into our house compared to our going to theirs was about 25-75. They were the elders, so out of respect, you just went there more often. As I got older, when my grandparents would visit, I would usually off doing something else with my teens, came girls, cars, freedom, and Elvis Costello. It pains me to say this now, but I was beginning to outgrow them. However, I can remember vividly the last weekend prior to Nana's passing. That Sunday, my grandparents showed up unexpectedly. On this occasion, for some reason, I can remember being especially happy to see them. At the same time, I was overcome with the feeling that I should stay home and spend some time with them. That Sunday, I enjoyed the company of my grandparents, and as did everyone else. A few days later, my grandmother was dead. I would never get to see her on this earth again. I now know that it was God's voice that spoke to me that day. In his special way, he was telling me what was about to come that week, and his message blessed me with one more time with my beloved Nana. Through all that time, I didn't understand what I do now, and I wasn't ready to accept God into my life. I did realize one extremely important thing, that we should savor every minute, every second with the ones we love. You never know when God will take those whom you cherish the most. It is imperative to treat your loved ones like it's the last time you'll ever see them. Every time you see them. Better yet, treat everybody that way. Everyone you come across in your everyday life, they are all God's children, and that's exactly how they should be treated. Just stop for 1 second and try to visualize what a world would be like, a world where everyone treated each other with love, dignity, respect, honor, forgiveness, and grace.